This film was produced with the financial support of the State Support Agency to Non-Governmental Organizations of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The opinions and considerations reflected in the content of the film belong to the Public Union of Scientific Research and do not reflect the official position of the State Support Agency to Non-Governmental Organizations of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Armenian vandalism, monuments of Western Azerbaijan. Zangezur, Goychay, and Yerevan districts are our historical land. Our people live in these lands throughout their history. But the Armenian leadership displaced hundreds of thousands of Azerbaijanis from their native land at that time. However, history does not forget and it does not erase the traces, no matter what the Armenians do. They cannot destroy the Azerbaijani name from these lands, and this is the case everywhere, in Yerevan, in Goychay, in Zangezur, in western Azerbaijan. In other words, they broke and chased away whatever they could. They tried to wipe our material and cultural heritage off the face of the earth. The Armenians destroyed all the cultural heritage belonging to the entire western Azerbaijan, including the city of Yerevan. All that culture has been vandalized. Our main goal in carrying out this project is to use all means to reveal the truth about all the historical monuments and other cultural heritage sites in western Azerbaijan and all the regions surrounding it to the international community and to convey it to the world one by one. The real truth is that the ground above and below in western Azerbaijan, which is currently the territory of the Republic of Armenia, shows the true owner of these places, the Azerbaijanis. Whatever they dig, whatever they do in Yerevan, they find out our traces. In 2003, when they excavated the Republic Square of Yerevan, the former Lenin Square, the remains of the Zalkhan Mosque and the Zalkhan Bath emerged from there. They saw it was the remains of the monument built in the Muslim Oriental style there, because while building the Republic Square in the former Lenin Square, they had demolished the surrounding houses in the Zalkhan Mosque. Only the madrasa of the Zalkhan Mosque remained. It was used as the exhibit hall of the Artists' Union of Yerevan until recently. In 2003, during the excavations of the foundation of the Zalkhan Mosque and the bathhouse were discovered, the bathhouse was then, of course, underground. They buried it again. Having seen it, they immediately covered it with concrete and tried to hide it. Even many Armenian public organizations engaged in public architecture expressed their objections, saying, "Why do you resort to such vandalism? After all, this is the history of Yerevan. This is the face of Yerevan." The processes leading to the concealment and falsification of Yerevan's history began at the beginning of the 19th century. The Yerevan fortress was occupied by Russian troops on October 1st, 1827, as a result of the Armenian betrayal. The Yerevan and Nakhchivan Khanates were united to Russia with the Treaty of Turkmenchay, signed February 10, 1828. On March 21st, Nicholas I issued a decree on the creation of a new province on the territory of the empire. The new province was named the Armenian province in consideration of so-called outstanding services of the Armenians in the occupation of the Yerevan Khanate. In fact, this name served to create a Christian buffer zone of Armenians in the newly occupied territories by transferring Armenians from the territory of Iran and Turkey. Armenian refugees who had been displaced from Turkey and Iran were resettled there, and those families still live there. I witnessed this, and Armenian religious historian Shah Aziz noted this in his book, Ancient Yerevan. In 1723, more than 100 Posha Armenians were displaced and settled in the Tepebashi neighborhood. Posha means Gypsy Armenians. I remember that the Armenians living in the city at that time did not like or accept the Armenians living in Tepebashi. They always called them Posha, or Shutovaz, and said other unpleasant words about them. Vandalism against monuments in all territories of Azerbaijan, including Western Azerbaijan, started after the artificial relocation of Armenians to the region. In 1902, these lists were noted in the memory book of the Yerevan Governorate, and 310 mosques were registered. 7 mosques were in the city of Yerevan itself, and the others were in the districts. As you know, the Yerevan Governorate consisted of 7 districts at the time. It is true that the districts of Nakhchivan and Surmalı were part of the Yerevan Governorate at the time. There were 270 to 280 mosques in the territory of present-day Armenia, excluding Zengezur and Karagoyanlu, and part of Goychay. Thus, excluding them, there were 270 to 280 mosques in the territory of Yerevan Governorate at the time. Today, there is no trace of any of these mosques. All of them were destroyed, as they wanted to erase our traces from there. The Russians who resettled the Armenians in the South Caucasus realized their mistake later, but it was too late. For example, in 1912, the famous academic Mar traveled to Yerevan and saw the condition of the Khan's palace, after which he had a complete impression of the Armenians. In the documents of the Archaeological Commission of 1912, Mar noted that there could be such factors as natural erosion, earthquakes, etc., but they have been destroyed by humans. He wrote with deepest regret that they had been broken and destroyed. He even noted that in 1837, Nicholas I came and spent the night in the Khan's palace. Later, he wrote his signature on the palace where he spent the night in the Khan's palace. Later, it was framed showing that the emperor had spent the night and had written his own name in his own handwriting. Mar wrote that the 2 rooms next to the room where Nicholas I had spent the night were used as toilets. At that same time, he observed a systematic destruction of the Muslim historical monuments everywhere. Nowadays, tourists going to Yerevan cannot even find those 2 toilets, because in 1918, Armenians completely destroyed the Khan's palace. There were 38 madrasas and more than 50 mosques in the territory of Zengezur until 1918. None of them remain. All of them were destroyed. After 1920, when the Soviet power was established, none of them were allowed to be restored on the pretext of fighting religion. In the village of Urud, where I was born and grew up, and whose name I took as a pseudonym, there was a madrasa with a history of more than 300 years. It was destroyed. There was a mosque. It was destroyed and turned upside down. The famous Tallinn Castle. There was also a mosque in that castle. However, Azerbaijani families lived in Tallinn Castle until 1918. In 1918, Armenians displaced from Turkey attacked that castle, and only a few people could escape and save their lives. The rest were killed there. An Armenian writer, Hachek Dashtiens, in his book Zov Pakhere, The Call of the Plower, described the scene how the Azerbaijanis were slaughtered. In general, in 1918 to 1920, all 50,000 Azerbaijanis living in 115 villages of Zengezur were expelled, and those lands were subjected to ethnic cleansing, and Dashnaks killed 1,068 people. Our compatriots tried to escape. They fled to Karabakh. However, they died there as a result of the plague that raged in the region at the time. Thus, notwithstanding the fact that in 1918, 50,000 Azerbaijanis lived in Zengezur territory, in 1926, during the Soviet rule, only 5,000 Azerbaijanis returned to their ancestral homeland. On the one hand, the Armenians destroyed the culture, and on the other hand, the carriers of that culture, so that not even a sign pointing to the name Azerbaijani would remain in the lands of West Azerbaijan. For this, they paid special attention to erasing cemeteries from the earth. This was also the case in Goychay. There used to be Oghuz graves, tombstones with ram head print, cross stones, and castles in the village in Goychay district. but they were almost all destroyed. They managed to keep the monuments that they used as their own in a certain sense. What they could not make their own, they completely destroyed later. This was also the case in the Zengibazar district of western Azerbaijan. We had ancient cemeteries in the direction of Zengibazar and Ulukhanlı. Here, during underground excavations, as well as farming, ancient stones came out from under the ground. Those stones were later completely destroyed by the Armenians, because they saw that they had nothing to do with the Armenians. Thus, they were also destroyed. This is the scene witnessed by Musa Urud, who went to his native Urud village in 2006. This is what he saw in the 14th through 16th century cemetery, rich in tombstone monuments with ram statues. I saw it had been completely destroyed and turned upside down. In addition, in the later period, the cemeteries where our ancestors slept were also vandalized. This is a great vandalism. There was a famous religious man called Sayyid Mir Ismail Aga there. Not only Zengezur Azerbaijanis visited his house, but also Armenians came, prayed, believed, brought sacrifices and vows. They destroyed his grave and tomb. This is also the case in the city of Yerevan. There were 3 cemeteries in the city of Yerevan. One was around Tokmak Lake, one was in the place of the current Russian cinema, and the other was in the place called Garabazar. There were 3 cemeteries of Azerbaijanis. In 1924, Armenians invited the architect Tominyan from Leningrad for the master plan of the city of Yerevan. The master plan of Yerevan was prepared. At that time, during the Soviet rule, they demolished those cemeteries and built modern houses. The only cemetery where Azerbaijanis were buried until recent times was the Tokmak Cemetery, and the Armenians started building their cemetery on one side of it. It was mixed, an Armenian cemetery on one side and a Muslim cemetery on the other. They dug and removed the Azerbaijani bones out of the graves, and in their place they buried their Armenians. Toponyms. There is no place name that does not prove that the lands of western Azerbaijan belong to Azerbaijani Turks. Therefore, the only way out for Armenians is to destroy historical names. Armenian scientist and researcher Zoven Gagadian wrote in 1933 that 2,000 out of 2,300 toponyms in the current territory of Armenia did not belong to Armenians. The other 300 toponyms are toponyms created later by Armenians or translated into Armenian for that period. In 1968, the name of the village was changed to Vorotan, including the name of the Zengezur Bazar Chai, which runs through the middle of our village and divides the village into 2 parts. For example, the Zengi tribes. They were ancient tribes before our BC. The name Zengezur was taken from there, which related with the Zengi River. The Zengi River flows through the center of the city of Yerevan. It is a very big and magnificent river. Later, Armenians called it Khrazdan in spite of the fact that in all Armenian sources it is mentioned as the Zengi River. Regarding the word Yerevan, Hachatur Obovyan mentioned that supposedly the Armenians coined the word Yerevan when Prophet Noah's Ark was anchored on the hill of Agridag. When there was an ebb and the water receded, the prophet Noah looked at the ground, saw dry land, and said, Yereval, Yereval. Supposedly, the name of the city of Yerevan was taken from here. This is absurd. The historian himself calls it absurd, and he writes that this is a fictitious word, that the name of the city was taken when the prophet Noah called Yereval. After the deportation of the Azerbaijani Turks who had remained in the villages in the southwestern part in 1948, hardly a single Azerbaijani Turk lived in the southwestern part of Goychay. This discrimination and deportation against the people and the population were carried out simultaneously against our historical names, toponyms, and against our cultural and historical monuments. The names of 704 settlements in western Azerbaijan have been Armenianized up to now. The process of Armenianization of geographic names at the state level continues in Armenia. 40,000 toponyms have already been replaced by Armenian names. There's only one goal here: to remove the name Azerbaijani from everywhere. The report submitted to the council also served to this goal. It said that Abbas Mirza Mosque in Yerevan is supposedly protected by the Armenian government as a monument belonging to other nationalities. The state protects this. Can you imagine? I follow the Armenian press. In 2014, one of the Armenian journalists wrote that he arrived in the evening and woke up in the morning to see that the monument had gone. In November 2014, they allegedly wiped off the protected part. They want to erase the historical Tepebaşı neighborhood of Yerevan from the face of the earth in the same way. The issue of Tepebaşı was raised in 1974. It was proposed to demolish it and build modern-style buildings instead. At that time, the first secretary of the Central Committee said that there was such a neighborhood in Paris and ordered them to study the example of the construction of the neighborhood in Paris, limit its scope, entrance and exit, and turn it into a historical museum. It was planned to keep it like our old city. So that issue remained unresolved. They could not implement it at that time. And now, modern buildings are slowly being built around that Tepebaşı neighborhood, as if they are removing it from all sides. The goal is to erase the traces of Azerbaijanis from there. The Armenians destroyed the Tepebaşı neighborhood. They reduced a large part of it and turned Tepebaşı neighborhood into a slum and put it in a miserable situation. There are slums everywhere in the city. The antiquity of the city can be determined from the ancient stones on its foundation. The Armenians claim that the city of Yerevan in their language, Erebunu, was built 30 years before ancient Rome. But for some reason, the oldest building in Yerevan is the Blue Mosque. There is no one else. The Blue Mosque was built by Hussein Ali Khan in the 1760s. It is this mosque that the Armenians present as an example of Persian culture. They agreed to relate the monuments with the Greeks, Persians, and Arabs, but not with the Turks. At any cost, the culture in those areas should not be connected with the Turks. The only remaining one is the Blue Mosque, which Armenians officially leased to the Iranian Ministry of Culture for 99 years. As the embassies of Muslim countries were opened there, a place of worship was needed. Therefore, Iran played a role here. In 1995, Iran allocated $1 million for the restoration of the mosque. After repairing it, they changed its inscription. There were 3 graves in the courtyard of the mosque. One of them was the tomb of Hussein Ali Khan. Those tombs are no longer there, and today it is presented as a Persian mosque. When I went there, I saw a plaque on the wall of the mosque. I couldn't read in Armenian, but I read in English that they had written the date of construction in the 17th century, showing it as a Persian mosque, Persian history. It is also very interesting that the cleric of the mosque was an Iranian Armenian. I asked if he had accepted Islam. He angrily protested and replied that an Armenian could not be a Muslim. I asked him if a man from Armenia could become a mullah there. In a word, the Armenians erase everything possible. Whatever they cannot erase, they describe as monuments belonging to other nations. It seems that there were no Azerbaijani names there. The presentation of the Emir Saad Mausoleum as a Turkmen monument, the destruction of mosques and baths in Demir Bulag and other neighborhoods of Yerevan in general, demolishing monuments and historical sites in the lands of Western Azerbaijan, artificial Armenianization of toponyms, destruction of ecology, those are all part and components of a single policy. The name of this policy is vandalism. Only wild creatures with no history are involved in vandalism.